Today on Data Radicals, I'm joined by Tom Davenport, Distinguished Professor of Information Technology and Management at Babson College. Tom is the co-founder of the International Institute for Analytics, fellow at the MIT Initiative on Digital Economy, and senior advisor to Deloitte Analytics. Tom has authored and edited 23 books and is a regular contributor to the Wall Street Journal and Forbes. As the pioneer of competing on analytics, he's been named one of the 100 most influential people in the IT industry by Ziff Davis. And one of the reasons that I'm personally most excited to speak to Tom is that he's seen data over multiple generations and is just a natural teacher and sharer of knowledge. And so I know everybody that's listening is going to be super excited to sort of glean a lot of that from this interview. Tom, welcome to Data Radicals.
Happy to be here. Thanks for having me, Satyan.
So let's maybe jump in. You recently authored an article in the MIT Sloan rag that basically was about 5 trends in data science and AI, and you didn't stay away from sort of some strong takes. One of them was but one that I think a lot of people would at least talk about or agree on is around agentic AI. You basically said that agentic AI is going to be the most significant trend for 2025.
I think I was the only person in the world who said something like that.
You're probably the only guy
one.
talking about AI. Yeah, right. Exactly. But maybe say more. Like what do you see? Dig into where it's working, where maybe it's not working, which jobs to be done are going to be augmented, and which ones are probably a little bit farther away.
Well, as you know, it's very early days still for agentic, and most of the enterprises that I talk to about it say they're either not using it yet or they're using it for quite simple, relatively inconsequential things. Like as somebody in an insurance company said, we certainly wouldn't use it for underwriting or claims, but we might use it for employees registering their PTO preferences or something along those lines. So, I think we still have to figure out what it means to have an agent that is probabilistic and, sometimes picks the wrong word or does the wrong thing. And there may be, I think, a return to some deterministic aspects of AI, with rules or something like that guide the workflow. But I think we'll see a gradual introduction. It's funny, some very well-known leaders of software companies, one of them, Microsoft, has said, oh, this is the new software. It'll replace spreadsheets. But I think it's unlikely that Microsoft will take Excel off the market or that the vast majority of people who use it will give it up anytime soon. So it's like, the installed base is quite large.
Yeah, there's a lot of people who do things with software as software is obviously defined. Where do you stand on this question of there's been these debates of sort of software is dead, AI is the new software. Where do you stand in terms of that question, and how quickly do you think any transformation will happen?
Well, I think AI may write a lot of the software, but I think there will still be a place for custom software. There will still be a place for packaged software from vendors for transaction systems and so on. So I think it's a bit much to say it's going to somehow replace software, and it is software itself, of course. And I think we need to remember that this has been around for a while in some form or another. Last week, I was meeting with some people from the AGI group at Amazon, and they reminded me that Alexa/Echo was an agent. It could actually do things like turn on your lights or turn off your heat or set up your alarm system. And they said, the really challenging thing is being good at both doing things and knowing things. And they're working on the next version of Alexa to do that. So I don't think we can minimize the challenges involved in making really smart agents who also do things well.
Yeah, this is pretty funny because what the users don't know is that while we were recording this interview, there was an upgrade agent on my software that literally turned off and shut down Chrome just so it could update. And what I love about this example is that, like, had it known any context about who I was talking to or what I was doing or looking at my calendar, it might not have actually done that work. And so there's so many edge cases in the real world where these agents have to be aware of context and somewhat sensitive to it. And I think the promise is amazing, but the reality of it is going to take time to evolve. Are there particularly novel use cases of agents that you've seen, Tom, that are ones that might have been farther out than you would have expected?
Well, there's a company based in Toronto that I've done a lot of work with that is very document oriented, particularly financial documents and documents of record for a variety of companies, and they've been using it quite successfully to extract information from all types of documents and really turn documents into data so that they're much more useful and can be reused and repurposed in various ways. And so they said it's really transformed their business that they can do this, and makes it much, much easier to create the software environments to make something like that happen. So I don't know how creative it is necessarily, but it's certainly useful.
That's pretty foundational. I mean, the act of sort of taking, I guess, unstructured data, whether it's a video or a document or an audio file, and turning it into something that's structured and turning it into something that's got sort of attributes and labels and metadata with it, is on some level like the act of analytics, because once you've made those decisions as to sort of what to count, or what that thing is about, then you can start drawing some questions and conclusions about it. So like that, I think, seems to be one of the most interesting classes of software that's out there. I mean, which gets to this kind of broader question of sort of unstructured data. Most data and analytics professionals would have defined their job in the realm of structured data, counting things in business and processes systems and operational systems. Do you think that job is changing now? Do you think it's more about other stuff?
I do, and I think we have generative AI to thank for that. And I'm old enough to have been quite involved in the knowledge management movement 20 or 25 years ago, and that was all about unstructured data as well. And it turned out that the tools we had for managing that were not quite up to the task. It was very labor intensive to sort of figure out what was important about a piece of knowledge and capture it and make it accessible. Generative AI is quite good at it, but your data have to be in pretty good shape. It's not going to tell you, for example, if you've got 10 different proposals for, I don't know, putting in SAP in the energy industry, which one is the best and which one ought to be the model that has the content that's really best for the rest of the organization to draw upon. So humans are probably going to have to do some of that. Gen AI may help a little bit and give you an opinion, but humans certainly need to validate it.
Yeah, for sure. If you think about sort of this validation question, the last like 5 or 10 years, people have been talking a lot. We've been talking a lot about this idea of self-service, and even more broadly, this idea of building sort of data-oriented cultures. You mentioned this idea of knowledge management, which is really about sort of, kind of capturing what the organization knows and about building good habits. But one of the things that you mentioned in the article is that the interest in sort of these data cultures is waning and has cooled. What led you to that conclusion? And can you say more about that?
Well, it's a sort of a positive and a negative story. This is a survey that Randy Bean does every year of data leaders in large organizations. And every year for the, I don't know, past 5 or 6 anyway, I've, with him, written a forward and a kind of overview of it. So I paid a lot of attention to it. And one of the things that was kind of the bad news piece was that every year, he would ask, how many of you think your organization is data driven, or do you have a data driven culture? And the numbers would be quite low, typically in the low 20s, saying that their organization had those characteristics. And then all of a sudden in 2023, he generally surveys at the end of the year. I think he called it the 2024 survey, but um, things doubled. Basically, we're up to almost 50% for no apparent reason other than Gen AI coming along and getting everybody excited about data and AI and so on. Um, this year, it's settled back a bit, not all the way back to the earlier days, but kind of halfway between. So that suggests, I think, that our love affair with Gen AI might not be enough to, dramatically change the data cultures of organizations. We probably won't know for sure for another couple of years when we look at future surveys.
And do you see, I guess there's this big debate around the CDO and sort of the longevity of the CEO, the role of the CDO, whether they should continue to exist. Talked about it with other guests on the podcast, and some folks are saying, well, look, the CDO, um, is getting encompassed or enveloped by the CIO. And then there's this question of like, well, for data professionals, there's sort of good data practice, good data discipline. There are knowledge management practices in the world of data. But it feels like there's, to your point, a little bit of waning around some of that work. How do you see that evolving? Do you think that's a temporary trend, or is that something that data professionals need to be more mindful of moving forward?
Well, I have a bit of disagreement with my co-author of this article. I just already mentioned him, Randy Bean, who believes that chief data officer role is very critical. It's critical that it's a C-level role. It's critical that it's a business role rather than an IT-oriented role. And I just don't think that's very feasible. I've done another survey of senior tech people in organizations, and I was very surprised to learn that they think there are too many of these C-level tech roles, and that causes a lot of confusion in organizations when you have a CIO, a chief data officer, chief digital officer. We don't even have a unique acronym for digital and data officers. The chief technology officer, the chief analytics officer, blah, blah, blah. So I think a better future is if you have a very business-driven executive who gets along well with other senior people in the organization. Then you can have one person who's likely to report to the CEO and oversee all of these things. Many of the functions would continue as before. They just might not be called, CDO or chief digital officer or whatever. So, and there are a number of those already happening, particularly in financial services. They manage all of those tech functions, and in many cases, even things like customer service or operations in addition. And they're very much a part of the senior management team. So I think that kind of senior spokesperson for all of these issues can really have a big impact on making the culture more data driven.
And what does that look like? I mean, in this idea of making cultures data driven, there has to be sort of this buy-in. You have to start measuring things that aren't the outcomes of the business, um, as an intermediate sort of touch point. And then often that's where people get lost because they're like, well, we're maybe more data driven, but maybe it doesn't actually impact it, or maybe we don't even know how to measure it being data driven. In this new world where everything's moving to AI and there seems to be some consolidation into the CIO, how does that spokesman show up? I mean,
What do they do day
what do
to
they
day?
do?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I think it's got to be multifaceted. And um, to be honest, I think a lot of the early efforts were not terribly impressive. They're kind of like what we did to make people more DEI oriented. Um, you watch a video and you take some questions afterwards to see, did you pay attention to that particular video or instructional medium? And obviously that doesn't really change much if you spend a few minutes and on any subject. And a lot of companies did that with data as an important asset, blah, 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 but didn't get into any depth. So I think from an educational standpoint, you have to pay a lot of attention to what's the context, what business function is the intended recipient from, what's the level of that person. And, if it's a senior person and you can justify it, maybe it should be one-to-one instruction. And so that's just on the education side. We need to put a lot more effort into it. On the issue of marketing data initiatives, I think most senior data executives ought to have a marketing person whose job it is to kind of trumpet the improvements that have been made in data around the organization, and showcase great examples of work with data and analytics and AI. I think there's probably establishing some new organizational structures for data as a part of this. Ideally, it's always been hard, but getting people in the business side to be data stewards, or at a minimum to create roles like data product managers or digital product managers or something like that oversee a broad range of activities that are trying to create useful products for internal or external customers, rather than just an IT project.
Yeah, I mean, I think the data product manager outcome, we believe that's a pretty strong direction, because on some level most data gets created as a result of some business process, and so it's exhaust, or it's an externality to something that somebody else is trying to do. But then the idea of a data product manager is basically to create something that's more usable, and that can be reused for a variety of different purposes, and at least that gives a thrust to that individual that they've got a job, and that job is to make this data reusable. Which, and many times what happens in data initiatives is that they get lost, and talking about knowledge and cultures is often soft, but it doesn't necessarily always produce business value.
Yeah, I agree. Although, we have, I think, a terminology challenge in that for a long time, I talked about data products and data product managers, and included the analytics and AI that makes data meaningful as a part of that, concept and that job. Now I've kind of concluded, well, if we do that, then it's confusing to people. Maybe data products should just be those reusable assets, and a digital product can be the combination of all of those things coming together that make it useful. But I did a survey, and about half of the respondents, this is again the senior IT people, thought a data product was just the data, and the other half thought it was the data plus the analytics or the AI. So it's just confusing, I think, or has been in the past.
Yeah, it's super confusing. And there's some people who have that very rigid, I mean, well, there's like a continuum that we've seen. And actually one of our product managers is writing a blog on it where, on some people just think of it as a collection of data things. And then other people think of it as, very rigidly typed tables that are, very well defined and semantically, consistent, and have data contracts backing them. And so there's sort of this continuum of definitions. And I mean, the thing that we're ending up on is like, all of those things can be true, but ultimately what really matters is reuse. I don't know how you respond to that.
Yeah, use in the first place and then reuse after
Yeah.
that. And yes, I do agree with that. And I think whatever you call them, your data assets ought to be reusable and publicized, and you should make it easier for people to reuse than to create, from scratch, typically, replicating previous activities. And I think that's a very important part of not only data management, but your productivity with analytics and AI as well.
So what happens then to the data industry in your view over the next, I mean, we've seen a proliferation of firms. We've seen tons of companies founded. These marketscapes are large. How do you see that changing in the next 5 to 10 years? Do you see fewer firms, more, I mean, obviously more, like, how does this all kind of play out?
My guess is that there will be a lot of consolidation. I mean, I think AI has driven, in particular, generative AI has driven a lot of that proliferation over the last several years, and I think we're starting to realize that generative AI, while amazing and powerful and incredibly useful under the right circumstances, is not going to be able to drive our economy the way it seems to have done over the past year or two. I like some of these analyses that say to justify the amount of money flowing into the AI hardware sector alone would require between 600 and 650 billion dollars in savings on the part of the companies that use it, and we're definitely not seeing that. And so I think that means some sort of retreat. I don't think we're going to swing into a full-fledged AI winter by any means, and I don't own stock in companies like Nvidia on their own. You can't avoid it if you own any kind of index fund. I haven't made sure that I've gotten rid of it all, but I think there's got to be some retreat.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. I mean, I guess like any hype cycle, there's sort of this, peak of inflated expectations, and it sounds like you're saying though, you feel like we may be past that peak and now starting to approach whatever the down cycle might be.
Yeah, and whether it's the trough of what is it, despair or disillusionment? I forget.
Something like that. Yeah.
I don't think we're there. We may not go all the way there, but yeah, I think we're just past peak, and a number of there's still a lot of debates about this. I love within Goldman Sachs, you have some analysts saying, "Oh no, it's going to cause massive amounts of productivity gain and economic growth," and others are saying, "No way is that going to happen," and they can't even agree within one firm. So, and you have economists who can't agree at all. So, I don't know exactly, but it seems to me that things are getting a bit, I don't know, inflated.
Yeah. And at the same time, all of the sort of AI creators seem to be talking about sort of this AGI being imminent within, years. I don't know what the Amazon team that you spoke with thought, but would love to get your perspective on that. And first of all, what does even AGI mean? Because a lot of people have different definitions for what this sort of fully, automated intelligence is, and then the second is, how close do you see us being based upon your survey of the actors that you talked to?
Yeah, well, it's, I think, quite ironic that we have all these conversations about when we'll achieve AGI when we haven't even defined human intelligence very well. So, and I think it probably plays into the hands of the vendors who want to claim, yeah, we're uh, just about to hit AGI. With such a poor definition, it's relatively easy to say that some aspect of it has certainly been achieved. But I believe that we won't hit AGI with generative AI alone. I think we'll need something that is able to make sense of the world better than predictive word model can do can do right now. That I don't know exactly what that is. There's people with varying philosophies. It seems unlikely that we'll go back to logic as a driver of AGI, but something closer to human intelligence, in which young children can make better sense of what's going on in the world than even the most capable generative AI model.
Yeah. So where are you then spending given these trends and given what you're observing in the market and your own work, where are you spending most of your time and energy and research?
Well, I've always really focused less on what vendors are doing and more on what their customers are doing with those capabilities. And so I spent a lot of time talking to companies about what they're doing with generative AI, how they're trying to create value out of it, how it affects particular industries. I'm particularly interested in healthcare because I think there's a massive amount of potential for improving healthcare with AI. I'm also trying to rectify what I think has become a bit of an imbalance between focusing on generative AI and other forms. I can't stand this idea of legacy AI or traditional AI, so I call it analytical AI. There's no perfect term for it because, of course, generative AI is analytical as well. But the purpose of generative AI is not to analyze data, it's to create content, of course. So I wrote a piece recently on analytical with Peter High, a consultant to IT organizations, on analytical AI versus generative AI. And a lot of people said, yeah, mostly people who've been around the industry for a while, saying this has really gotten out of hand. And for a lot of organizations, analytical AI could even be more valuable than generative AI. I'm always interested in, what does this mean for how organizations manage and the organizational structures, as we were talking about before, the chief data and analytics officers and so on. I've been interested for a long time in this issue of if this technology is so impressive in the realm of marketing and personalization and kind of, one-to-one approaches to customers, why do I still get so much crap in my inbox and on my mobile phone screen and so on? And so I just finished the first draft anyway of a manuscript with Jim Stern on, how do we really fulfill the promise of one-to-one marketing, which was, defined 30 or so years ago, but for most of us hasn't really come true yet. And will generative AI be the final straw that makes this all possible? And I think it will certainly help. I doubt that it will be enough in itself.
And what do we need to do to fulfill that promise then, in your view?
Well, I think it really becomes a combination. It's doing things with managing both your structured data and your unstructured data relative to customers. It's, just the idea that if you're only interested in selling more to your customer, you're probably not going to be successful, because that will lead to excesses of, trying to sell them things that they really don't need or want. You have to be genuinely interested in improving the lives of your customers if you're, I think, going to be successful with this. So there's kind of a purpose element to it. Lots of different analytical technologies, generative analytical AI, even, going back to more plain analytics, in a sense, would be an improvement for a lot of organizations. And multiple channels, of course, because everybody interacts with multiple channels. And I think some awareness. I wrote a book a long time ago. It was one of my worst selling books, sadly. It's called The Attention Economy. And it argued that this was in 2001.
The irony of that is great.
Yeah. Well, it came out the day before 9/11, and somehow the world's attention went otherwise. But even then, there was a shortage of human attention, and it's just gotten hugely exacerbated since then. So I think, trying to preserve your customers' attention is paramount as well.
I want to go to a book that you wrote in 2007, Competing on Analytics, because I think it speaks to somewhat of this idea of data culture. And because ultimately what people want in building these cultures or in building these knowledge repositories is to actually create some form of competitive differentiation or competitive advantage. What did you learn from that book, and like, tell us what the conclusions from that work is?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, it's not rocket science. It's having senior people who are interested in analytical decision making, hiring people who can do the work, the day-to-day work of analytics, both the data management and the data analysis. By the way, all these things are true about AI as well. I wrote another book a few years ago called All In on AI, 2 years ago now, and it's basically the same set of ideas, only about AI. I think uh, devoting, but because many people are not oriented to analytics or AI, devoting a lot of attention to upskilling them and helping them use these tools more effectively in doing their jobs, um, and ultimately having some sort of unique data that is proprietary to you that will really differentiate you, because ultimately data is the fuel of analytics and AI, and if you don't have something distinctive, you're going to have the same models that everybody else has.
And I mean, whether it's the All In on AI book or the Competing on Analytics book, is there anything that I mean, given particularly what you said at the very beginning, which was we had a blip, went all the way up to 50%. Now that's gone back down. There's less interest. Um, is that something you can do? Do companies like successfully affect these transformations? Is that something that that companies are able to do, or and what does that transformation look like? Because there's sort of the idealized state, there's the current state, and then there's the question of like, how does one actually get there?
Yeah, well, it was interesting. For in competing on analytics, I was fortunate enough to have a friend, a neighbor, and a fellow Little League parent and fellow Harvard Business School professor for a while, Gary Loveman, who oddly enough went from being a professor at Harvard Business School to becoming CEO of Harrah's, then Caesars when they merged, and the world's largest gaming company, an industry that should be based heavily on data, but wasn't in many cases. And he did, I don't remember exactly how many years he was there. I'm guessing close to 20. And he really engineered a huge transformation. So in this book on being customer focused with your data and AI and so on, we talked about that as a great example of how to make that transformation. However, the disappointing thing is they ran into some issues. One of their business units had done a private equity transaction in the last financial crisis, 2007, I think it was, and they declared bankruptcy. Um, there was some dissatisfaction with all of the management team. Gary ended up leaving, and the subsequent management just wasn't terribly interested in data or analytics or AI. I mean, they did some things, but nothing like what Gary had done. So I think it really takes a kind of a consistent purpose and drumbeat of messaging over the long run if you're going to be successful as an organization with this.
Yeah, and there has to be some. I mean, one of the things that I think we've been talking about is this idea of sort of adoption and culture, and adoption is a measurement of the culture, but ultimately all of that has to result in some set of outcomes or value. Um, and so this kind of the assertion from the top that this is useful and these behaviors are useful, and the consistent tie back to value are the two trends that we seem to have seen.
Absolutely. And I think, that's been one of the challenges with AI. Companies have experimented a lot, but not really put a lot of things into production deployment. That was true of analytical AI. It's now true of generative AI. The numbers are getting better, but I think we're still probably around, 20% have a production deployment of generative AI. A year early 2024, I did a survey with AWS and it was 6%. So improvement is happening, but it's still too low. If you don't have any production deployment, you don't have any economic value. And so, we need to commit and spend the dollars and make the organizational changes necessary to put these things into production, or we're not going to get value and it'll dissipate over time.
And in the more senior sort of, you get the opportunity to talk to a lot of senior CIOs, senior business executives. Are they in this kind of hype cycle? Are you feeling like they are also coming to the conclusion that maybe that there's been that they've kind of gone past the risk reward uh, continuum for these AI investments? Are you feeling like there's going to be a backlash in the near term? I mean, people are talking about sort of the limits of scaling a lot of the models, and that you're going to need 10x or 100x the more computing resources to get to a better version of the model. Is the reckoning for Gen AI coming soon, and is that going to be a big adjustment in your mind?
Yeah, well, I think there are two issues there. Is there reckoning coming, and how are data leaders preparing for it? And I think it's tough for them because, on the one hand, as one said to me, this was a woman said, "I feel like the belle of the ball now. Everybody's paying attention to generative AI, and I'm a hit at every management meeting, and the board wants to talk to me, and so on." Um, on the other hand, there has been, I think, um, I've gone into organizations and I said, "Who's responsible for generative AI around here?" And you get, five hands going up, and so there's a lot of contention for it, and I've seen that in surveys as well. And so, something that's really hot creates a lot of desire to own it. Um, uh, Maybe the smart data leaders are trying to be sort of more collaborative and consensus oriented, because then they won't have the blame if it starts to go down somewhat. But will it go down precipitously? Agents are going to give the whole domain a boost, I think, although there's even more hype for agents before it appears than there was for generative AI, I think. Uh, but I do think there will be some retreat. And I said in the MIT Soul Management Review article that I thought this really needed to be the year where you demonstrate value and measure it, and or 2026 will be much less fun.
Yeah. Well, maybe let's talk about that agent topic for a second. What people use the word a lot, and they use the word agentic a lot, and I think what exactly is an agent, and how does that differ from what people experience with ChatGPT and the like, and why is there so much promise?
Um, well, I think there's several different attributes. One is that it does something useful rather than just inform you. It performs a transaction, or as we said earlier, it um, uh, uh, turns the document into reusable data, or makes a reservation for you or something like that. It is more autonomous than existing systems. Nobody knows exactly how autonomous they can be because, as I said, you're still dealing with machine learning based prediction models, and they might make the wrong prediction, and the ante is raised when real money and business transactions are involved. So I think for a while there's going to end up being some review of these transactions by humans that maybe certainly less than doing all the work themselves, but not taking the human component out completely. um, I think there is a generative AI component, but it's not just generative AI. It's probably analytical AI as well. It's probably still, APIs. It's probably still um, transaction systems, ERP and CRM and so on. So I think it will have to be, there'll have to be a lot of integration, which means that it's going to be a fair amount of work for companies to pull this off. I think vendors will help, and they'll provide lots of tools, but I think companies will have to figure out what they want to accomplish with it, and make it happen, and that will take some time and effort.
Yeah, for sure. Um, are As you sort of look forward to 2026, I mean, you've obviously done a future forward view as to what the trends happen to be. What predictions, give us two or three predictions, which, I know as somebody who's watching the field, you're probably very careful to not do those things, but
Now, it's interesting. You're the first to ask me, and I haven't really thought about it all that much. But I, what I would like to see happen is some really major change in certain industries that can use these tools to, healthcare, as I say, I think enormous potential. Right now, it's in the AI in healthcare is found largely in the research lab and not at the bedside. So I'd love to see some of these things go to the front lines. I'm also very interested in a way, for me, this is a retreat to some of my older work. I wrote the first article and the first book on business process reengineering. Neither were the bestsellers in that area. I like to say I bore the burden of academic respectability. And this very heavy burden to bear from a book sales standpoint. But I do think people are realizing now that to get the value out of AI related tools, we have to redesign our processes. And so I wrote an article in the current issue, the January-February issue of Harvard Business Review with Tom Redman on how to marry process and AI. I'd written a previous article with a couple of other guys on how to redesign your processes with AI. And so I think lots and lots of opportunity for that. And again, economic value requires that we change the way we do our work. And there has to be some intentional design activity. It can't just evolve.
Yeah. I mean, I do think that the merging of sort of traditional business process with these agents, I think has a ton of opportunity because you can give them both, you can construct them in a way that they are pretty narrow. And then you can also take these orchestrating agents to actually start putting together these things in a way that make them perhaps more powerful and flexible and than, traditional hardwire processes have historically been.
Yeah, and even eventually, I think interorganizational, where is one company that I've worked with in the past that is called CCC Intelligent Solutions, and they have created these ecosystems of property and casualty insurance companies and body shops and automobile parts vendors, so that when you crash your car, they can give you a quick estimate based on a photograph from your phone, but then they can orchestrate the whole process. And I said to them, this agent thing is basically created for the kind of work you do. It'll be hard to sort of orchestrate all those interorganizational ecosystems and the information flowing back and forth and so on, getting everybody to agree. But it would be really useful when it happens.
Yeah, it'll be an exciting moment when it does. Well, Tom, thank you for taking the time to speak with us. I think, as I was so prescient to predict, this was an incredible conversation and pretty wide ranging. So thank you so much for the gift of your time, and we'll look to have you back on sometime soon.
Thanks. I just don't know, was I radical enough or
I think you passed the radical test. Absolutely.
Oh, good. Well, thanks for asking such great questions.
Great. Till next time.